Okay, we are live. James is having connection problems. That's good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Black Ops testing webinar where we're going to talk about QA mail and testing websites. So on the webinar, we have James Lyndsay. We've got Steve Green.
Hello. Hello.
And we've got Tony Bruce.
Evening.
And myself, Alan Richardson. And for those of you that are live, part way through or close to the end of this, we are going to be issuing a discount for the webinar we are doing in September. It's going to be limited to 5 people, and it's the most outrageous.
It's a workshop, though. It's not a webinar.
That's good. It's the workshop in September, which is even better. Even better if you get a discount on that. So stay tuned for that. Those of you who are watching on the recording, you'll have to take advantage of the super early bird because you've missed out on the webinar early discount, super discount, marketing discount that we're doing. So we have been testing QA Mail. QA Mail is an application to help you test emails. Essentially, when you are testing an application that sends out emails, one of the problems that you sometimes have is using multiple email addresses. So we're going to have a little discussion about how we've done that in the past. QA Mail essentially gives you a whole bunch of random emails that you can use, you can access through a GUI, and you can access through an API if you want to do some automation with it. So Steve, are you ready to give a quick demonstration of QA Mail?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Excellent.
To say not very. Let's turn my screen sharing on. And
I can see your screen. Oh.
Okay, so you should be able to see my browser that's got QA Mail in it. There's a very limited toolbar that only does 5 things up here. So every time you click this new button, it generates a new email address and a new mailbox for you. So I'll click that, and you'll see that over here on the left we now have a new fairly random email address. And if I click new again, it will just create another one. These 2 buttons allow you to go backwards and forwards through them. This button here empties the mailbox. Not terribly obvious by looking at it. Ah, it's a shredder. That's what it is. I wondered what that icon meant. Just figured it out.
Silicon chip eating a piece of paper.
And this icon refreshes the mailbox that you're currently looking at. And that is all there is to it. So when you want to use QA Mail, you create a mailbox, you take this email address, I'm going to stick it into my Outlook, which you're not going to be able to see, and
It's so exciting, a live demo.
We've done this before.
and I'm just going to send that now. In about 2 seconds, I should be able to hit this refresh button and see my email appear in this mailbox. And there it is. And if I want to see the body of that email, I click on the link here. So it's taken the subject line, turned it into a link, and when I click that, there's my message on the right. And by clicking this Show Raw Message link here, we can actually see all the header information that Outlook sends. There's my subject line, and that should have said this is the body, so never mind. So that basically is all that QA Mail does. If I send another email and hit refresh, it's not arrived yet. Oh, there we go. It just lists them all in this left-hand panel, and if I click that one, I can see my other test. And that really is all there is to it when you're using the GUI. The API does a bunch more stuff, but I don't know anything about that because I didn't look at it.
So the API probably does a little bit less in that you can create new sessions, you can create new mailboxes, you can get lists of the emails, you can read the emails, and you can delete or you can empty the mailbox. So it's a nice, simple API for when you're working with it. Under the covers, what this is doing is you have to. This is an open source app, by the way. It's written in Ruby, and it's using the Sinatra framework, as James pointed out this afternoon. It's not a Rails app, as I thought. You install this on your own server, which has a mail server installed. Then it monitors your mail file directory, looks for, there's a little process that pulls that folder, then pulls the new messages into the database, provided an email has already been generated that matches the one that has been received. So it's a fairly simple app, which made it a bit more challenging for testing, I think. So before we get into details of how we've tested it, who on the webinar has had to test email systems before, and how did you do it? Steve, how do you do it?
Well, we've not tested anything like this, but in the course of testing other applications, every single day we have to create multiple email addresses. So the approach we took was to buy a domain for each of our testers and set up a catch-all. So you take my case. I own the domain tester2.co.uk. So when I'm testing, I just create or I just use any email, any name at tester2.co.uk, and the emails go to the catch-all, and from there you can forward them to anywhere. I forward them to my test partner's email account. And every time a new tester joins us, we spend whatever it is, £2.99 buying a domain for them, which takes about 3 minutes, as opposed to the amount of time it took to install this free QA mail, which at a commercial rate would have cost us probably about £15,000. So that's the approach that we've taken.
So one of the interesting things is, when you do that approach, that's great for your interactive testing where you're doing stuff manually and things like that. When you start moving into automation, it can be a little bit of a pain to automate the mailboxes because you have to start using the POP libraries or the IMAP libraries, and everything is going into the main inbox, so it can be slightly hard to partition out the emails. So what this does for you to make it slightly easier is it partitions out those random emails into kind of pseudo inboxes that you can use on your own. This kind of solves that problem. So have you had to do this in the past, Tony?
No, I don't have an approach because I've not had to have one yet.
Okay,
so I'm jotting down everything Steve just said, and I'll write down everything you guys say.
All right, so I've had to do this quite a lot. In fact, I had to do this on one site so much that I wrote an application that was incredibly similar to QA Mail and ran on the App Engine. The good thing about the App Engine is that you can receive emails through it, and you don't have to set up the mail server for you. But with all these things, you are at the mercy of other people's limits on how many emails you can send per day, what kind of bandwidth you have. So something like QA Mail, where if you can get it installed on a server you own, can make that a little bit easier. Other things we've done in the past, I've got plenty of domains, I send emails into those. We set up Gmail accounts for each project, because with Gmail you've got dot addressing. All the dots in Gmail email addresses are ignored. So alan.richardson@gmail is the same as a.lan.richardson@gmail. And you've got plus addressing with Gmail. So Alan.Richardson plus Black Ops testing would just come through into the Alan.Richardson. But do not send emails to alan.richardson@gmail, because that is not my Gmail address. I was just using that as an example, so don't spam the other one.
Yeah,
other
the
things.
plus is useful.
So what was, I missed that, James?
I was saying that the plus is useful. Everything basically, you put a plus on the end of something, and it all goes into the same Gmail box. So you set up a Gmail account for a project, you put a plus, and then whatever you're doing with the test on the end of it, and you can have quite a self-descriptive email address. So you can look at the email address, and you can see what the test was doing when it sent the email. If that makes sense. That's what I've done. On the very rare occasions I've tested things, I've been sending emails that need to go out and in.
Yep, and it's also useful if you're signing up for newsletters, because then you know who is selling your email address. So if you haven't signed up for our Black Ops testing newsletter yet, you can use your Gmail account with a plus after it, and you will see we never sell your emails, and they are safe on our newsletter, so you should sign up. The issue you've got sometimes is the terms and conditions that people have. You never know when they're going to change their terms and conditions. You never know how easy it's going to be to automate. Like before I created my App Engine application, I was using Mailinator. Mailinator is another temporary site where you can create random emails, and they're all public. Have you guys used Mailinator?
I have, but the site's not temporary. The mail address is temporary. But yes.
So Mailinator's been around for years and years, and it's changed a lot. When I was using it and I was automating it, halfway through our automation project, they added a CAPTCHA into the system, because too many people were using it for spamming and automation, just for like spam traps, and so that killed our automation. So I had to do something to fix that. Now, Mailinator, you can pay $29 a month and you get their commercial offering, which doesn't have CAPTCHA and does have an API. It's improved over the years. So QA-Mail is open source, but it does have competition out there in the world, some of which have private servers and you don't have to pay for it. So one of the things that I found interesting when we're having to test this, normally when we test emails, we're testing emails because we're testing the content in those emails. Is that a valid thing to say? Has that been your experience?
Yep.
So what we tend to do is we tend to have the system generate the email, send it out, then we're trying to look at it in Outlook and whatever, different clients and Gmail, and make sure it does these other things. Here was a very, very different setup, because what we're trying to do is send emails in and make sure they are captured correctly and rendered correctly and routed into the correct mailbox. So that was an interesting challenge, I thought. Did anyone experience a kind of mental shift when they were trying to do that?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I found it difficult to, if you like, empathize with what would matter to me about what would matter to a prospective user about this. Well, it's an open source, bit of open source software. So a bit of background for those of you who've not had a look at the source. There's not a lot of it. It's quite a little application, and it's relatively easy to read, even with my limited Ruby skills, and even in the way that it's been written. And if I found a bug, I would change it. And I think a bug would be often obvious, and I kind of approach it with a sort of a coding head. Sabara, does it support HTML format composing emails? Apparently not. It's got a request out there to do multi-part emails, and I think, Alan, you filled me in to say that multi-part emails include those HTML bits. No, it doesn't. It doesn't deal well with HTML format at all.
It actually does support HTML, but I think the issue is if you just send HTML, it's fine, but if you send a multi-part formatted email, it doesn't like that.
It's time to figure out some HTML for me, but
I was looking at multi-part and it came through fine for me. It doesn't render the email, but it does show it as the separate MIME types in the body.
I think this would be a good point to point out that there's a difference between the demo version that you're allowed to use and if you check it out yourself and build it. I think the one that's built is more up-to-date, if I remember correctly. Well, it has to be, actually. So you will find some differences if you're testing both.
Most of it, I think, ended up testing just one. Alan, you and Steve were on Steve's version, I think.
So I mainly used the version Steve had. So this is probably a good time to discuss the installation.
Yes.
So one of the things that lets this down is the extreme pain involved in installing it. I mean, I only spent 3 or 4 hours trying to install it, and I didn't get it working after that. So I was about to just about move on to the demo environment, start testing that, when Steve managed to order one of his staff to spend his entire life setting this up.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we probably spent upwards of 20 hours getting it installed. We weren't counting, but from beginning to end it took 7 or 8 days. They weren't complete days, but well, probably a couple of them were. It was phenomenally difficult. I've got some notes here that our IT guy wrote, just in case anyone's thinking of doing this themselves. So there were lots of problems all the way through with dependencies, packages, and gems. Lots of problems with permissions not being what they needed to be. The instructions tell you to install PostgreSQL, but that's not enough. You need to install PostgreSQL Server Dev and PostgreSQL lib, but it doesn't tell you that anywhere. And there's some other libraries you need. We had problems with Ruby's letter import demonizing on its own without being told to. So we had to tell it to stop doing that. What have we got here? It says, oh god, oh yeah. There's a thing called a passenger module, and it doesn't run unless you've got a gig of RAM. And now we installed this all on an Amazon Web Services instance, which has I don't know how much RAM it's got, but it didn't have that much. And all the way through, everything failed silently. There was never any error messages to tell you what the problem was. It would just sit there and not work. And so some of the things you might guess for yourself, but this one with the needing a gig of memory was not at all obvious. I don't know how we found it. So we had to pay Amazon for some more memory, and suddenly it started working. So it was phenomenally painful. If this was a real-life project, there's no way we would have done this. We'd have bailed out like Alan after about 3 or 4 hours. So it's an area that developers can really tighten up on. Better instructions and just making it work better.
I mean, it's a shame because I mean it's incredibly useful if you are testing emails, but setting it up was really hard. So maybe just some tutorial videos showing it from start to finish on an Amazon instance would be helpful. Or
to be fair to the guy, we did email the developer a few times, and he did reply trying to be helpful, but we found his responses would only give us a hint of what was needed. And I sort of had the feeling if he took 30 seconds more in his reply, it could have saved us hours of work. So, I don't like to be too critical when someone's doing all this for free, but no one's going to use it when it's as painful as this.
Yep, I think that's the biggest thing to improve for people to actually pick it up and use it, unfortunately. So a pre-built Amazon instance or something that an image that people can use and configure slightly might help. So on to, I guess, the testing. So when we were starting to look at this for testing, I mean, I don't know how you guys did it, but I sat down and I came up with a list of things that I was going to test on this, and I was really going to start looking at the API. But then when I had my list and I started to look at the code, I discovered most of the things I wanted to test weren't actually implemented, and most of the things that I was going to test would have just given me a 500 error. So I had to drop my test plan, because it is, as James mentioned, a really, really small app. So with something like this, it is worth reading the source code, if you don't mind about it, just to see whether anything that you're going to test is viable or not. So I had to completely change my approach to testing as a result of that. Anyone want to talk about their test approach at this point?
Well, along those lines, those of you who saw Steve's little demo there would notice that you get given what looks like a random email address, and so I thought, well, that'll be a fun bit to go test. I'll go and see how random it is and whether it shares these things and how it stores them, and it doesn't. It just generates them randomly on the fly. The email address, I think, is 7 digits, which can either be a lowercase alpha or a numeric, so that's 7 to the power 36, which I worked it out is 76 billion combinations, so you're unlikely to clash. But yes, I had a look at that and thought, that's simple enough to not bother testing, if you see what I mean. It is a single line of code. The failure is built in but unlikely. I kind of get it, and I kind of get that it could be, there are circumstances in which you can change that likelihood. So yeah, I thought about testing that, and then I thought I wouldn't after I looked at the code. And that was a useful thing to be able to do. It is a little app, and that's nice to test. So that was my approach. Was in part, and I had difficulty empathizing with what would be really useful about it that I couldn't look around myself, and reading the code didn't really help that empathy at all. But what did help the empathy was I rang the developer up this afternoon, so that helped. Because he's the primary user, and Vitaly is a lovely chap and gave me some of his time. Unfortunately, we only managed to actually get in touch with 5. So I have a different view on the application because I've had a chat not only with the developer but also with the user. So I kind of see how Vitaly is using it, and it's his. He says he uses it every day, and it's really useful. And it is really useful, but it's really useful to Vitaly. It's a one-user application at the moment. And I think the installation reflects that. So I specifically didn't look at the installation because I heard the screams of pain coming from Steve. And I don't know if you've watched these webinars. I always try and get mine up and running. I just looked at this time. I thought, no, this time I'm not going to do that. So I just used what I'd been given, and I found that I was using Yosemite, and I got any number of problems with Yosemite falling apart on me. Its mail doesn't work the way I'm used to. So I switched over to Gmail, and so all my testing was done via Gmail into this thing that was running on the demo site, and you can probably see most of my test data with the link that I put up earlier on. I did a bunch of little tests to look at little problems, made sure I knew what was going on with the code, and had a chat with the man who made it and uses it, and to get my empathy going with what it should actually be doing. So that's how I test.
So one of the things with this, I mean, you've just seen the demo that Steve did. You essentially just get the raw output with all the SMTP headers on it. So James, when you were testing it and you sent in an email from your email client, how did you know that what you were seeing in QEmail was correct?
Well, the first instance, I sent something very small and just saw that there was an email, and the second instance, I sent something very big and I saw that the end of it was there. Does that make sense? So I sent in a body of 3.2 megs, but I didn't look any further than that. And I don't know whether it's worth me trying to share my screen. Those of you with the link can look at the thing that I was looking at. That's interesting. I now have a 404 for message that I sent, which means that either he's cleared it out or some beggar has deleted my stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, James, all those mailboxes are empty. I can't see anything in any of them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've got it on my screen from one that I loaded just before I put the message up saying, please delete that. So one of you lot has messed me up. Anyway, so initially it was just the content. But there is, as Alan said, there's a view button. And you can flip out view, and it shows you all the message headers. And as it happens, you can use, if you are working with Safari, under their view messages, that you can see all the headers of your email there. You can see the raw email. I had a quick look at a very basic one, and it looked much the same. I didn't do a byte-by-byte comparison. is it possible? But I thought that looks right, and moved on to the next bit because, as I said, this is something that I think it's not necessarily trivially easy to test, but I think the bugs are going to be obvious to me doing the work from where I am. And if I became an expert in sending these things, then I'd start to look for these issues. If I saw a byte difference, I'm not sure I would know what I'm looking at. Does that make sense? He asks people who can't tell him whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah. So when I was testing
thanks for deleting that, everybody.
when I was testing it, I was interested in whether what I was seeing in QA mail was actually what I'd sent. So I found a whole bunch of different ways I was trying to do that. So when I was sending it from Gmail, Gmail has got the original format button on the side, so you can actually see what you've sent out and what you've received. I was doing this through automation code, so I put debug mode on my Java mail sending library, and I was able to see the very small message that I originally sent out with very little routing information. And I sent that through into Mailinator and Temp Mail and a whole bunch of other anonymous clients, pulled those out as text files, and actually did WinMerge comparison so that I could see the difference between the headers, what extra headers were added by the different mail systems. And I find it really interesting in that the headers in this show all the routing that the email goes through. Some of the headers give away a massive amount of information that I wasn't expecting, and because we can see IP addresses from the sending machine if you sent it through that, and the routing machines it's going through. You can see headers that have been added by different clients on different steps of the way, which is interesting. So one of the things that I thought I was seeing an error with QA mail, with one of the MIME type headers changing case, was actually not QA mail at all. It was actually the postfix mail system that it's getting the emails from, and a lot of the header and MIME type encoding issues I thought I was seeing weren't from QA mail at all. They were from the mail system that it was picking up the messages from. So I found that interesting.
I think it's worth saying that when you look at what QAML is able to do, it's not able to do that kind of thing. So anything that it's doing of that type is an emergent property of the big kit that it's been built on. And so it's one of the things about testing a little app is you can look and say, it's not this thing. This thing doesn't have anything in it that changes case. It must be further down the stack or further up the queue or whatever else. And that's one of the differences of testing this from testing other things. Going back on mute now.
Yeah, well, I mean, what was interesting is I had it, because we were installing it on Steve's, I was able to look in the database and I was able to tail the import file log. And because there's so little functionality in here, I was trying to find a place that I could actually test it. And the import routine, the daemon that polls the mailbox, I thought I could test that, right? There's something useful in there for me to test. But what I was struggling to do was send in emails that I thought would break it, because there's only one part in that loop that you can break, and it's when you send in an email that's going to be of an invalid format that might cause it to 500 error, that might cause the mail loop to break and the daemon to fall apart. But it's so hard to send in emails that are incorrect. I couldn't send it from the Java library I was doing because it was protecting me and wouldn't let me create invalid emails. I had to use on my main mail server, one of the server-based mail clients, to send in emails that had a bad format. But postfix again was filtering those out. So some of those were bouncing off postfix. So even though they're valid email formats, because if you look at the email regexes and email formats, you're allowed to put in open brackets, you're allowed to put in quotes, you're allowed to put in minus signs. But postfix was just rejecting all of those and bouncing them back to me. So I couldn't get in the messages that I thought were going to kill the loop, which is fine for QA mail the way it's set up, because it generates random emails that just have numbers and letters in it and don't have those characters. But it's worth bearing in mind in the future when you're testing with mail systems that just forward through all emails, that you may not be able to get in every email that you're expecting, because the mail server itself may block some. That was an emergent behavior that I was not expecting. So I've got some notes in my notes when I release them that have that documented.
That might explain something that I saw, because I was testing at one point all the different symbols, a lot of which are permitted, and it just made no sense to me that some symbols would get through and some wouldn't, and I'd get bounce back for some, undeliverable messages for some emails and not others. It was, and it didn't feel like it would be QA mail doing that. I'm sure it was post-fix,
So
but
I had the advantage
couldn't tell.
So I had the advantage that I was tailing the import routine, so I could see when an email got through and it was being pulled, and when an email didn't even make it through to that import routine and it was just being bounced off from postfix. And then I could see when emails just went completely missing. When I sent one with 256 or 257 characters, which is essentially just too long for an email, I got no message back. It wasn't bounced. I've no idea what happened to it. It's probably still out there on the internet in some routing system somewhere, just dying and just killing something. And so you get to see, because you're limited by where you have your observation points in these systems. And so I'm trying to maximize the observation points I've got. And the only ones I really had were, can I see it when I'm sending it? And can I see it when it's being pulled? And that's it. Because I didn't have access to the mail server itself or the logs on there that I could find. So I found this an interesting challenge in terms of observability. I found it quite hard. So Steve, do you want to talk about some of the testing you did?
Yeah, what I'll do, if you let me, is run through my whole approach, which is sort of similar to what I've done on previous webinars. So just going to share my screen, hopefully. Yeah, there we go. So started off just defining my context there. Most of that's irrelevant. In terms of risks, I thought look at new features, but the QA Mail website doesn't. It's pretty minimal. I couldn't find any release notes, feature lists. I couldn't see what's new, what's old. So I couldn't target testing in terms of new features. Known buggy areas is something we often look at, but I couldn't find a bug repository. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I couldn't find one. Then what else? Skip all of this. Blah blah blah. So the test approach. So I was thinking, what can I do? And one obvious thing was to look at standards compliance. And so I had a quick Google around and found there are more standards relating to emails than you ever want to know about. And some of them go back to the early 1980s. So RFC 821 was about 1982. And most of them have been superseded many times. So actually trying to find the latest version of things is just a total nightmare. I've listed out in this document about, 6 of them here, some of which supersede or modify each other. And they are hugely long. They're all text, so there's no formatting. They're unreadable, hundreds of pages long. But you could spend an incredibly long time it's sort of reading those and finding all of the business rules, if you like, for emails. And you could come up with hundreds or thousands of tests based on these documents. But within the 3 hours I've given myself, there wasn't time to do that, so I didn't bother.
Steve, presumably as well, other countries may have their own regulations and standards.
So no, these are global.
Okay.
so by whoever owns the internet. And if you look at the contributors, they were people from all around the world. I think probably academics to start with. And so yeah, there are no alternative standards. Although one of the things that has happened over the years is that there are a number of sort of de facto standards that have emerged, that because things like sendmail became ubiquitous, features in that became de facto standards, and everyone else had to support them, even though they're not actually in any of these RFCs. And so there's they're the kind of things you just have to know because they're not written down anywhere. For instance, there was a consensus on things like internationalization long before this RFC 6531. That came along, as far as I can tell, after the event to document what had become a de facto standard. So anyway, unlike Alan, I chose to test through the GUI. I didn't look at the API at all, and so that meant my points of inspection were even more limited. I knew what I was sending, and I could see what's coming through in the UI, and I had no visibility in between. So that made it difficult to tell if bugs were in QA mail or postfix or elsewhere. First thing I wanted to do was to find a tool to send emails to give me more control than conventional email clients do. Because if you're using Outlook, it uses Word as its HTML editor and creates the most disgusting code. It also, as Alan's already mentioned, there are millions of headers that get sent. So I wanted control over that, and there are quite a number of email, they are sometimes called email launching tools or email sending tools. And so I did a bit of work to try and find a good one of those so that I could create exactly the headers and content I wanted. It also means that by doing that, I don't go through the ISP's SMTP server because I don't want things getting modified on their way through. And most ISPs do things like modification of content, filtering, blocking, all the kind of stuff that is going to mess you up. So ideally you want to have stuff sent directly from your machine straight to the other machine with nothing else in between apart from routers.
I'm suspense. What did you use? What?
I've got that further down in a second. Here we go. So I only had time to test 3 from this free download center website. So the first one I tried, this super email sender. Yeah, well, actually, all of them only allowed me to set the stuff you can normally set, your subject, body, recipients, etc. I couldn't find any that allowed me to set all the headers myself. Now, I know they exist out there because I've used them before. I just couldn't find one within the time available. So that limited the testing I could do, because I actually wanted to test. We got things like this content transfer encoding header. You've got various options for that, like quoted printable and base 64 and a bunch of others. And I was hoping to test that, and I just wasn't able to. So what I also found with all of these was they were actually the weakest link in the chain. So, for instance, when I was trying to test really long subject lines, actually the limit was, well, I broke this super email sender. I put 10,000 characters in and it killed it. So I was never actually able to find out what QA mail's limit was. So what's this? Also, Oh yeah, I couldn't send email addresses with that plus tag that we were discussing earlier, but I could send them from Outlook. So it looks like this sender program has a bug where it won't send addresses containing a plus, and that's really poor. So I tried another one. This next one, quick mail sender, rubbish. It's just so minimal it was useless. And then I tried this third one, fast email sender, and I couldn't get it to work at all. so, so I ended up doing all my testing pretty much with this first one, super email sender, and with Outlook. So what did I do? Did just a little bit of poking around to see what QA mail does. That's all been pretty much discussed before. One of the standards things I thought I could do was testing case sensitivity of the email address, because that's something that's well documented, and it turns out straight away there's a bug there. So in an email address you've got two parts or three, depending how you look at it. You've got the name, the domain, and the top-level domain. In email addresses, the name is case sensitive and the domain and top-level domain are not. However, with QA mail, the whole thing's case sensitive. So there was a bug there. I put some HTML tags in the email body, and that all displayed absolutely fine.
Steve, when you say that displayed fine, do you mean that if you put in a header tag, it was actually rendered as an H1?
Yes, so if I go back...
So I've actually flagged that as a bug, right? Because what that means is it is vulnerable to cross-site scripting, because you can send in an email that has the script tags, and it will actually execute that script. So, I mean, you can do that in the subject, and you can do that in the body. So you can actually send in an email to this test server that generates a cross-site scripting vulnerability because of that. It actually shouldn't just render it as an H1. It should render it just as the brackets.
Yeah, I figured in the context of this application that isn't a bug, because you'd be hacking your own site.
Well, if you do show raw message.
Oh, no, what you can't see is I actually did send. That does include some script that generates an alert box, but you can't see it. So
exactly. So that's bad.
Yes. Oh, you want to see show raw message? And yeah, there you can see it down the bottom. I put that script in, and sure enough, yeah, as soon as you view the message, the alert box fires.
And the interesting thing is, if you put it in the subject field, then as soon as it's shown in the list, it generates that cross-site scripting. So that is actually a vulnerability.
Right. Yeah. Whether it's a relevant one, obviously it would be relevant in a lot of applications. I just query whether it's relevant.
If you're using it on your own, it's probably not an issue. But if this got more popular, and people started using it in production, that would start to be an issue.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
For me, it's worth saying that when you put one of these addresses up, that's available for anybody to send stuff to. If, for instance, anybody on this chat happens to send something to Steve's mailbox that he's got there and he hits refresh, or indeed goes in and deletes it, no, for that you need the thing I sent, you would see your mail turn up in Steve's, and then you could send Steve a cross-site scripting thing that he can look at right now, if you chose to.
Yes, but don't do that.
You can make an alert show up on Steve's machine.
So, to go back to my notes, what else did I do? I tried to break the layout, but I actually couldn't. The content's in an iframe, so putting in like closing body tags just break the iframe, not the whole page. And in fact, you don't even notice. What else did we do? I used Outlook to test delivery, because the email sender programs don't do that. They can't request delivery receipts, read receipts, and all that kind of stuff. Then what else did we do? Looked at truncation of long strings, but QA mail seemed fine, and my sender tool broke before QA mail did. And I had intended to do stuff with character sets and content encoding, but just ran out of time. I don't know how relevant they are, but I kind of suspected there would probably be bugs there, because character sets always cause bugs in just about everything that we test. So the bugs we found, actually, for me, the worst bug was a usability bug, and that is the number of times I clicked the empty mailbox icon, that shredder icon, instead of the refresh icon. I can't tell you how many times I did that, and it's really annoying when you've sent 10 test emails and then you delete them all by mistake.
But Steve, now that you recognise it's a shredder icon, do you think you'd still do it?
I never did that. Did you do that, Tony? I never.
No, I didn't do that.
Oh, it's just me, but it would be nice if there was an "Are you sure?" dialogue before deleting all of your stuff. That would be nice. I've already talked about case sensitivity. Yes, and as is always the case, one of the bigger bugs I found was by total accident, and that is whereby, if I go back to the QA mail, most of the time this email address displayed in the top left is the email address for the mailbox you're looking at, and so you'll see it here in the two. That is the same as that. However, under some circumstances, the wrong email address is displayed at the top of the page, and that can lead to really unfortunate things like you deleting the wrong mailbox. Because when you click this shredder icon, it does not delete the email address that's displayed there. It deletes the mailbox that is displayed here. They should be the same, but sometimes they're not. And the reason is you're supposed, if you've got multiple mailboxes, you're supposed to use these previous and next buttons to scroll through them.
Alan and Jane, can you turn your mics off? I think it's causing an echo.
But what I found is that every time you do that, it actually triggers an event in the browser history. So if we look in here, you can't see it. That's fantastic. On my screen here, I can see the browser history that just has millions of instances of QA mail. And if you use the browser's forward and back buttons, you notice when I do this, this email address here doesn't change, even though I'm cycling through different mailboxes. So now it says CS6J blah 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 there, but we're looking at mailbox 4S2N. And so if you use the browser's forward and back buttons, you get out of sync between what's displayed at the top and the mailbox that's displayed down the bottom. And as I say, you can end up deleting the wrong one. So that's rather poor. So
that's interesting. That's because of the iframe and what the development team have done is when you all of these buttons don't go to links. They issue JavaScript calls based on items in an element. So it's picking the text out of that email and then using that rather than any kind of control in the page. So it's I think that's a perfectly valid thing to flag up. That's a good one.
Yeah, the frustration is I found it by accident, and I was thinking, what test should I have done to find that intentionally? And I couldn't answer that question. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts of how could you find that bug on purpose?
So I made a note that I wasn't keen on the iframe functionality, and there was, for such a simple application, there was too much reliance on JavaScript and the clicking on the things rather than just sending messages forward and back. So I tagged that as a risk, but I didn't explore it. So it's good that there's an actual manifestation behind that risk.
Yeah. So next thing I found that I can't really explain, but I found these various behaviours. So
yeah. So remember, all of this stuff is postfix and is not QA mail.
Oh right. In that case, I won't talk about it. Blah, blah, blah. What's this? Oh yes, it's possible to send an email without a subject line, and if you do, you get, if I can share it, where are we? QA mail. You get something like this, where something's been received, but there's no clickable link. So I can view all my other messages, but I can't view that one. And I've come up with 3 ways in which that can become viewable. Well, I came up with 2, and Alan added 1. So I'll just sort of demonstrate those, because this is the sort of thing that can come up on other types of projects too. So one way is to use keyboard navigability. It's a fair bet there's actually a link there, but it's got no anchor text. So if I just put the focus on subject by highlighting that and hit the tab key, oops. Right, yeah, if I hit tab key again, yes, so you can see where the focus is. If I go back once more, the focus disappears and it's on this invisible link. And if I hit the enter key now, we can actually see, and it helpfully says in here, that's the one with the blank subject line. So that's one way to do it. Another way is if you look at, which you can't actually see on there, when I hover over these links, actually perhaps the easiest thing is if I open one in a new tab, then right, I can't see my own screen. Up here we'll see we've got an ID attribute. In this case, ID is 96, and if I look at a different one, it says ID 95. So I thought, how about I just edit that and just try 97. I don't know where those IDs come from, but that didn't work. That's presumably someone else's message I'm trying to look at, and I don't know.
So those IDs, Steve, are auto-generated when the record is put in the database. That's the key that's put on there, and then the referential integrity keys are enforced by an index.
Right, I thought it would probably be something like that. I thought I'll guess 98. No, 99. Oh, there it is. There's my blank subject line thing. So obviously that works for us because we're the only people on this instance. The TPL4.com is ours. So there was never going to be much of a gap between the ID numbers. So it was reasonable to just try and guess them. Obviously, on a high traffic instance, that's never going to work. And it seems to show that I can't look at other people's ones. They were coming up with 404, so that was good. And the final way of doing it that Alan suggested was simply to use developer tools to inspect the element, and hopefully somewhere down in here we'd be able to see, I don't know where it actually...
If you expand that TD, you'll see it.
Where's the TD? Which?
The one that's highlighted.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, yeah, there's the link. And it's, yeah, ID 99, that, as we already know. So, so there's 3 ways that we can view that message. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts of other ways that that could be done.
So I viewed the source and actually added the subject, and then the link shows up.
Oh, what? Using developer tools?
Yeah, so just doing what you were doing.
So we inspect that and to expand that CD. If we put some...
that you've already got a target, which is interesting.
Target equals letter. Yeah, that's just going to open it in the iframe on the right.
Oh yes, sorry, I'm reading the wrong bit. So after that, I added the subject.
So that
just in there in the body.
I can't get it to
right click it.
Right click and what do I want to do?
Well, when I right click it, you should have an edit HTML in the menu.
I've got edit as HTML. Oh, you can't see my right click menu.
No.
Ah, right. Okay.
So just there, type in something.
Just put link in there, and click out of there. Will it appear? Oh yes, there we go. And so now, yeah, we can click that. So yeah, there's another way to do it. Cool. Let's close that. So I think those were the pretty much all the bugs that I came at. I'll just show briefly the way I planned and tracked my test coverage.
Okay, Steve, can I just interrupt you for a sec, and then we'll come back to that?
Yeah.
So just because we've been on for an hour and we're still going to keep going for a little while, the exciting thing is that the Eventbrite page is open and that the special webinar pricing is available, and there are only 5 tickets at this price. Is that right, James? He's muted, but he's nodding. It's exciting. Grab it while you can is the message.
There are only 5 tickets. Be one of the first 5 people on next September's extraordinary Black Ops testing webinar workshop, not webinar. We're at the Royal Statistical Society in Errol Street in London, which is a lovely big space. We're looking forward to it. We're going to be doing some live testing, but more to the point, you're going to do some live testing. We're going to have a big room full of people all testing the same things. We'll all be sharing what we find, and we'll talk about the lessons that we're learning as we're testing. So it's lots of testing in the real world on real stuff, and it's on September the 15th, and it's your opportunity now to buy a seat for the cheapest possible price, because we're only telling the webinar about it.
And if you can't remember that URL, head over to blackopstesting.com, and then look, there's a link on the front that will take you to it, and then you can click the booking details.
So that is posted into the chat.
We could do that. That'd be too easy. We've got to get in there, make some sort of effort. All right, Steve, do you want to carry on?
Okay. Yeah, I'll whiz through this. It's pretty much the same thing that I do on all these webinars, just showing people how I plan and track my coverage in this spreadsheet. So in column 1, I've got all the major areas that I was going to look at: character sets, attachments, subject line, body, and address. I never got to look at character sets, so we'll skip past that. In column 2, I break each of these major areas down into things. I looked at attaching files that they just get stripped out and you get a message telling you what it's thrown away. I tried delivery and read receipts, they're not sent. The subject line, I tried a blank line, large number of characters. 10,000 characters worked fine. 50,000 characters worked fine, and my sender program couldn't do more than that. Someone earlier said there was a problem with 256 characters in the subject line, I seem to recall. But I didn't.
Subject, that's in the email address.
Oh, right. And
I managed to mess up Yosemite. Not QML, the whole of my Richard mail on Yosemite with something that big. Very frustrating. My mail is now broken.
That's what Gmail is for.
That's what it ended up being for, yes. Not pleased.
So I did a few more tests. I have this Oracle column, which in this case there was only a couple of tests where I was using an Oracle, and that was RFC 2821, which talks about case sensitivity. These were the tests I described earlier, and we had the failures where the domain and TLD have to be lowercase, which shouldn't be the case. And then down here, these tests were where I was trying all various symbols. So I took all of those are permitted symbols, and most of them were undeliverable. I got bounce backs. This is the only one, the underscore is the only symbol that I was able to get through successfully. And I tried some non-permitted symbols and they got bounced, as we'd expect. So that's how I do my sort of planning and tracking of test coverage and cross-referencing against oracles and results. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about.
Cool. So there was only one thing to follow up on that I want to do, Steve. You said you couldn't find an open defects log for this, right? And that is correct. I couldn't find one either. And I did a bunch of testing around routing of blind copy, CC, no one on the 2, but people on the CC and the VCC. And on the environment that you had set up, because we're using an older version, that has a major bug where everything just goes into the 2 column. It's not forwarded through into the person on the CC list or the VCC list. But that was fixed in a later version. And with the way that they're developing the app, you won't find the bug details in a defect list, but you will find it in the checkout comments when you look through the history. So that's how I saw what bugs were being fixed.
Right. So are there actually proper versions of this?
So,
and how do you know what version you've got?
So you know what version you've got because you have cloned a particular version or downloaded a particular version from the site. There's no version number on it, but everything is in the Git repo, so it does have a version against it.
Mercurial. Yeah. Right. You can always rewind because you just whack it all into a source control system and pick up whichever one you want. If that's the way it's set for you. So yes, Vitalia's commented all his changes with what he's fixed, and you can usually look and you can see, yeah, there's the fix. That's clearly a fix for that thing. So it did lead me to feel that there were bugs that were worth finding. Vitalia is fixing them, but he's fixing the bugs because he finds them. I think he's fixing them when he finds them himself in his own work.
Yeah, so I think the one that you mentioned that you'd likely fix is the lowercase, uppercase, the case sensitivity. So that's going to be a relatively easy one for him to fix, and I imagine he'll do that pretty quickly. Because he's been responding really fast to feedback, because the API didn't exist when I first looked at this. Then I mentioned to him, I would probably try and use this if it had an API, because I would probably want to use this through automation. And then a day later, there's an API on it. So I can understand why the API doesn't have a lot of protection around it, but there's such minimal code there that he's able to make fairly major changes to it fairly fast.
So just to follow up on that quickly, Alan, we were talking earlier about editing the session ID or session key in the URL, and it brought back a lot of information about the code base or paths and so on. But that's actually been fixed since we talked about it earlier today, so that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I would have demoed it. Take my word for it. There was an issue there.
There was, and I think
There was the screenshot.
one of the reasons that was showing up was that he had a setting on the machine to be a dev setting. There was a little note right at the bottom that said, "You're seeing this because you've got some kind of debug thing on." I've got the note written down, but I don't have the thing in front of me. And because I knew we'd talk about this, I said to him this afternoon, I said, "This is going to happen. Are you okay with that?" He said, "Yes, I'm fine with that." And I thought you're gonna switch your machine over so it's not a dev machine anymore. And fair enough. So what it was doing was when you stripped the parameters, not gave it the URL, but when you stripped the parameters and still gave it one of the little Ruby addresses, so it was going off to try and make a web page, it wouldn't find what it wanted, and it would give you a full it would give you a big error description. And Tony, you found something in there that it shouldn't be showing you, I think.
There was, well, actually, Alan mentioned it. It was password something or other.
One of the internal passwords is shown through in the environment variables. It's a fairly common Ruby issue, which is why I found it online.
It's a bloody stupid thing to put in an environment variable, but yes, at least one that comes out. But yeah, it's for I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, yes, it's gone. I don't have the notes in the right place because I've been trying to format something else has been going. Anyway, yeah, so that was there. It was real.
That we've been going for over an hour. Has anyone got anything important from their notes they want to bring out or discuss?
I want to say that I went a bit of a different direction, and it was all through the demo GUI and through Gmail. I didn't find the bugs that Steve found. I'm kicking myself about that. I went and had a look at a couple of things that I would do if I'd built it. So I had a look, as you say, at the mail headers, because those are always unexpected to me. I tried looking at it through a code validator. I tried looking at it on alternate things in case I would, how would I get on something alternative? Turns out you pass the URL round, and the URL contains all the details it needs to reconstruct the session apart from the cookie. So if you send a URL to a different device, you can pick up it as if you were cookied in on another device. So it was good. I liked it. But the final thing that I did was I got in touch with the owner, who seems to be this project has only got one author. And I spoke to him today, and he said, "Yeah, I wrote it to do what I wanted to do in my work." And I think that's an important thing to look at. We test basically somebody's internal test tool, and he's kindly made it open source because it seems to be an interesting thing to have out and to have live. And I would suggest that it probably is, because I would find it useful if I had to do this again. But it was interesting talking to him to find out what he really felt it was for and what he really felt it needed. The final thing that I asked him was about what he was proud of. He's proud of the simplicity, but that he would rewrite the web user interface HTML side, because that's not his area of expertise. So if I was testing it, I might go and look at the JavaScript stuff, which is exactly what Steve found. And he would suggest that if he was to rewrite it, he'd use a framework like Twitter Bootstrap. So I think that gave me a whole set of perspectives that I was lacking without speaking to the product owner. So that's what I was going to share. And that's it for me.
I think it's interesting that this application is so close to the one that I wrote when I had the exact same need. And mine was incredibly simple as well, so it's really good that it wasn't just me that felt I had to write something to be able to do this, and that someone else has actually done something that I could try and use in the future. If it was just a little bit easier to install, this would be on my list of I would absolutely use this.
So Alan, how did yours differ?
What was that? Sorry, Tony?
So how did yours differ?
So mine differed simply because of the technology that I was using, and mine wasn't as open. Right, mine you had to register your email address. It sent you verification emails back so that you could use it. It was a little bit more secure in that instance. and you had to reserve blocks of emails in your session, and you could actually delete your reservations on it. So it was just a little bit more, because mine was being designed to be used by a team, so I knew it needed to be a little bit more flexible. This one's being designed to be used by individuals, but because it's got that easy-to-use API, you can so easily wrap this with automation. In fact, I mean, like, the automation code that I've written for this is on GitHub at the moment, so I will be putting a link to it on the website, but if anyone wants to look at it in the short term, let me post this into the chat. So I wrote some Java automation around it to help me explore and experiment with this, but also for me to understand what I needed to build and use from abstraction layers. Because the interesting thing that we've all been discussing is that in order to test this, you need tools that give you the flexibility to test it. So Steve looked for a tool that allowed him the flexibility of controlling the headers and seeing the messages that were put out. We all use tools that let us look at the original source, either on Gmail or in Safari, because it was important for us to drill down to it. And the Java library that I used for sending emails made it hard for me to test some of the conditions I wanted, because it said you don't want to do that, that's an invalid thing to do. So I would have to drop down to a lower level of abstraction that the layer was built on. The abstraction layers that I was putting together were designed to exercise the API, not necessarily test it. A lot of times when we're automating REST interfaces, we make it very easy to exercise the interface and make all the calls, but it's hard then to use the same abstraction layer to make issue requests that, instead of doing a GET on that endpoint, do a POST or do a HEAD or do something else, or add extra parameters or change the parameters or make a null parameter, those kind of things. So the reason I spent time automating it was to try and see what the weaknesses were for the default automation approach and what I needed to extend for actually using the automation to help me test this application rather than just build up some automation around it. So that for me was a useful exercise, and you'll see some of the steps I took in that code base if you choose to look at it.
It's really easy to read. I was very impressed.
I'm not a good coder, it has to be easy to read. So other things, so in terms of other tools that we used, I used Postman a little bit when I was testing the API, when I was bypassing the Java code that I did. I use, normally I think when we use SSH we use PuTTY. I was using Bitvice, which is my favorite Windows SSH client, because it comes with an SFTP client built on as well. So I quite like that. I found the show original functionality in Gmail that I had never used before, but I'm now using all the time. I think it's brilliant. I'm now fascinated by the headers that the SMTP mails have got all through them, and now I'm just hitting IP addresses everywhere, and I'm seeing who's using mail senders, who's going direct from the machines, whose machines are unprotected. This is just fascinating to me. I was tailing the import log as I was testing. That was incredibly useful. I used Mailinator and tempmail.org as comparison oracles so that I could compare it with the raw messages that were coming through postfix. And I used WinMerge as the comparison tool, and I had stuff going through Fiddler, and I was using Fiddler. So there's a surprising number of tools that I was using, even just for testing something as simple as this.
I think the only one I used that was different that no one mentioned was Firebug, but I assume that everyone used something similar. And I think Steve just used it anyway.
Yeah.
I ended up using, rather than Firebug, I used the dev tools in the various browsers I was using. I mean, inevitably, I'm looking at stuff on GitHub this time. It isn't on GitHub. It's a Mercurial thing on Bitbucket. Yeah, which was it's very nice to go. I popped that into my own control, which is Altacian's source tree, and that gave me a lot of information. It does better comparisons, basically. That was useful to me, but it was a remarkably untooled session for me. Skype was one of my tools, because I gave the guy a call. So that was it. What was surprising to me was how often and how many problems I found on my own, as in the operating systems that I'm using and in Gmail. I've had little irritations the whole way through. So clearly, email is one of those things, a bit like Bluetooth. When you actually dig into it, it's horrible. So that's why I think it's good. This is a nice, simple tool with very straightforward architecture of code, because you can look at it and go, oh, okay, it's not going to cope with that. That's all right. If you see what I mean. Email's horrible. It's an accreted, emergent glob of thing that's been built on top of the internet since the mid-1980s.
Actually, one of the tools I used was just time. It wasn't on purpose. I just didn't have as much time as I wanted to. But waiting or being delayed gave me more feedback because I knew that the install would be a pain in the ass, so I didn't even try. And that saved me a lot of time. So that was quite useful. Because I knew that Steve was doing it, and I knew Alan would give it a go, so I thought I'd wait and see.
Yep, so for me, this whole trying to test this app was incredibly interesting, because I haven't delved into the SMTP and the email that much, so I found a huge new gap in my knowledge, which I'm trying to fill, so that was really useful for me. And I think it's a really useful
worth
tool.
of RFCs if you want to get into those.
Yeah, there's lots. The thing is, it's amazing that every time we're testing emails, we look at the standards to try and find out what is a valid email, then we push it through, and we discover that we're trying to push the boundaries of it within the spec, but we've chosen to implement it an entirely different way, and then you have the discussion about, but this is a valid format, and everyone's going, yeah, we don't care, no one's using that in their emails. If we lose 3 customers, we don't care, we're doing it nice and easy. Email just gives you this huge variety of implementations and choices around what people do with it. So I find it interesting.
Yeah. Well, every regex out there is wrong, because you can actually have any character in an email address. You can have as many @ symbols as you want. You can have consecutive dots, because the email format allows you to put comments in within either the name or the domain. And within the comment, you can have absolutely anything you want. And the regexes don't take that into account. So I don't. Well, I suppose they could, but there isn't a single one out there that does.
Yep. So that was really interesting. So anyone else?
This is the first time we've tested a one-man band bit of software. It's the first time we've tested effectively somebody's internal tool. They've been kind of put it on open source. It's a useful tool. It's different. It's different testing something that one person has written and they have in their head, and nobody else has necessarily tried to install, and they haven't had, the guy who's writing hasn't had to explain its architecture to his maintenance guys. This is a one-person tool, and it's really good to see how that works and to see how we test it. Partly because we tend to not test one-person tools. If I've written a tool, I don't actually test it terribly well sometimes, because I kind of think it works, and then somebody uses it and they come back and they say this is bust. I think that Vitaly's going to find the information we've got about the install stuff, and Steve, the bug you had, I expect he's going to find that useful. I hope that he'll comment on that. But it's been very interesting for me to study that. A one-person tool written for a very limited job by the person who's going to use it. That's a different flavour thing than we've done before.
Yep. So I'm about ready to wind up and call this an evening.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you all who stuck to the end of this long, what are we calling it, Black Ops testing?
Yes, that's the name, James, yes.
That's 2 kids and not enough sleep. 2 small kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, everyone. That was so. I mean, we're going to release as many of our notes as we can onto the website, and we'll have various write-ups, and there will be a replay of this. So if anyone fell asleep, that's fine. They can watch it back. But the discount is out there. It has a limited time for it, and that is the thing we are promoting. So we won't mention anything else. So I'm prepared to say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Sign up for September.